Good morning.
Morning.
How's everybody doing? All right. Let's start with a word of prayer. Oh, Lord our God, we're thankful for this morning we get to worship you. And this morning we're especially mindful of our mothers, and we're thankful for each of them and the influences that they've had on us. We ask that you please be with me as I teach this class this morning and help me to do my best to present your word in a way that brings honor to you and helps us to understand your truth better. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Right, as you can see on the screen, we are going to be taking a look at the book of Ruth this morning. I love the book of Ruth. It is just as far, if you were to rate the books of the Bible based on readability, just what makes a really good story to sit down and read, Ruth's got to be somewhere toward the top of that list. The book of Esther is another one of those books that's way up there on that list, but I mean Ruth's it's one of the best books to just sit down and read. It's 4 chapters. You can do it all in one sitting. It's a really good book, but it's more than just a great story. There's a lot of meat in the book of Ruth that's worth chewing on if you take the time to really sit there and think about the book of Ruth. It's one of these books that really can cause you to take a step back and think about God's providence, about how that works. You know, what might God be doing behind the scenes in the everyday, small, little actions that we take and the joys that we experience, the tragedies that we face in life, and how might God be working through those to accomplish his plan. So the book of Ruth, it focuses on, you've got 3 main characters that the story revolves around. You've got Ruth, the Moabite. She's not an Israelite. Does anybody remember anything that we've seen about the Moabites so far in the Bible? Does anybody remember? The Moabites, they were the people that lived on the east side of the Jordan River. Do y'all remember late in the book of Numbers where you've got Barak, who is where he's called upon to curse the Israelites? Well, that was the Moabites who were trying to do that. They were the ones that were not a moral people. They were the ones that introduced Baal worship to Israel. They were not good. Ruth was a Moabite woman. You've got Naomi, the Israelite widow who had to move to the land of Moab. And then you've got Boaz, the Israelite farmer in the town of Bethlehem. And the story is going to be about how God worked through their lives. Again, y'all just interrupt me with questions or comments. Don't hesitate to raise your hand at any point. Let's start with verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. We go on and we are told this man's name is Elimelech. His wife's name is Naomi. And they have 2 children, Mahlon and Chilion. And their 2 sons. And they traveled to the land of Moab because there was a famine. But look at this phrase, in the days when the judges ruled. If you were in class on Wednesday night, we looked at the book of Judges. And when you read that phrase, in the days when the judges ruled, what does that tell you about what was going on in the country of, among the people of Israel at this time? What was that era of Israel's history like? In the days when the judges ruled.
It was days of ups and downs for the Israelite people. I mean, they from highs to lows spiritually.
That is a good way. It was a day of ups and downs. It was a roller coaster of history. But I would also say, kind of like a roller coaster, when you're on a roller coaster, you start with the biggest ups. And the further you go, it gets further and further down, right? It is ups and downs, but it's also a time period when, if you look at the end of the book of Judges, that's the worst of it. It gets real bad. Just go back and read the last 5 or 6 chapters of the book of Judges. It's a dark, dark time. There are ups. There's a lot of downs, a lot of idolatry. It's a very hard time. And it's brought on by their own unfaithfulness. This is not a good time in Israel's history. That's when, so it's dark and difficult days. That's what's going on. In fact, there's a little refrain that we saw. I'm going to go back a couple. This is our last slide from, let me go back to the last slide from Wednesday night. This little refrain that we see throughout the end of the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And everybody did what was right in their own eyes. They don't have anybody leading them spiritually at this time, okay? Let me just get back ahead to where we are. Okay. So we're introduced to this Israelite family here in chapter 1. Chapter 1 it starts off very dark. You have, they go to Moab in search of food, and then Elimelech dies. Then his two sons go on to marry 2 Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And then Balaam dies, that's one of the sons, and then Chilion dies. By the time we get to verse 6, the only members of this family that we have left are Naomi, who is now an Israelite widow living in a foreign, ungodly land with 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. Things are pretty bad, right? The book of Ruth starts off very bad. Let's go on to, then we get, the story really gets going when you get to about verse 7. Naomi decides, it's time for me to go back to Bethlehem. It's time for me to go back home. And she knows how hard that is going to be for 2 foreign Moabite young women to have to go leave their home and live in a foreign country. And she urges Orpah and Ruth to stay behind. And Orpah agrees. She decides to stay behind with her people. And it's at this point that we get introduced to what kind of person Ruth is with her loyalty. Can I get someone to read for me? You can either read off the screen or out of the Bible in front of you. I don't care. Can I have someone to read this one for me? Ruth chapter 1, verses 15 and 16.
And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return to follow you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God."
What does this tell us about Ruth's character? loyal. She is loyal to Naomi. Why? She has no blood relation to Naomi. Don't know. Maybe it was something about Naomi's character that she just loved Naomi. Maybe it was that she had been introduced by her deceased husband to Israel's God. I don't know. But the thing that is highlighted here is Ruth was faithful and loyal to Naomi even when she didn't have to be. Even when being loyal to Naomi was going to mean a life of hardship for her. So she decided that she would stick by Naomi's side and go live as a young widow in a foreign land. At the end of Ruth chapter 1, there's these interesting verses that really just kind of sum up the status of the story so far. This is Naomi speaking. She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Lord has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity on me?" Does anybody have a footnote in their Bible when it comes to Ruth 1, 20, and 21? My ESV does. Anybody see a footnote down below this? Would somebody read what your footnote says below Ruth chapter 1, verse 20? Naomi, that name, her name means pleasant. Well, that's a pleasant name. But she says, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Does anybody have a footnote that says anything about the name Mara? Mara means bitter. I don't even live up to my name anymore. My life has been bitter. The Lord has made me bitter and sorrowful. It's horrible. And that sums up, at this point in the story, the book of Ruth this is a hard story. Someone who's just had a rough set of circumstances in their life up to this point. Sorrow and death, that is Ruth chapter 1. I'll pause there. Anybody got any questions or comments before we go on? All right. Here's where the story gets good, when you get into chapter 2. In chapter 2, the first thing they realize when they get back to Bethlehem is we have these two widows, one older, one younger. How are they going to provide for themselves? They need food. That's the first problem they deal with in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. And so Naomi comes up with a plan. Ruth, it's the time of the barley harvest. Go behind the harvesters and pick up whatever barley it is that they have left behind. And pick up some scraps that you can bring back for us. Well, it just so happens, quote unquote, it just so happens that Ruth finds herself in a field belonging to a guy named Boaz. And guess what? It just so happens that Boaz is actually part of the same family as Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. And here we get to see an insight into what kind of man Boaz is. We see he has a special offer that he has for Ruth when he sees her out there picking grain behind his farmers, and we get to see his character. Could I get someone to read for me verses 8 and 9? Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 and 9.
Then Boaz said to Ruth, "You will listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean another field, or go from here, but stay close by, my young woman. Let your eyes be on the fields which
could I have somebody read verse 12 for me? This is skipping down a couple verses.
The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge.
Boaz is familiar with, at least with who Ruth is. He's heard of this widow who has stayed, this Moabite widow who has stayed loyal to Naomi. And what does this show us about the kind of character that we see in Boaz? What kind of man was he? He's kind, generous, gentle. He's praying for blessings to come upon her. Anything else?
He seems to be, we talk about how awful it was in the day of Judges. It's like Boaz was an exception to that.
He was. He is a good exception to what was going on in the nation of Israel at this time. In fact, even what we see him doing here, where he's letting someone glean what was left over after his harvesters went through, this is a commandment from the law of Moses. It says, when you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands. It's basically saying, leave some to take care of the poor. Leave some to take care of those who are experiencing hardships in life. And Boaz is acting faithfully with the law of exactly what God has commanded him to do. He's showing compassion for Ruth. And so chapter 2 ends. Ruth goes back and she tells Naomi what a great day she's had. I met this guy named Boaz and he took care of me. He told me I could go and to go to his field and he wouldn't let anybody touch me or bother me. And Naomi hears that name Boaz. And she starts to grow a little bit hopeful. We're going to see at the beginning of chapter 3 that she knows something about Boaz. I'm sorry, this is the end of chapter 2. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. What was that?
It's amazing Boaz did all of that, not knowing the connection with Elimelech.
That is a good point. That's a good point. I wonder I wonder how much did Boaz recognize his role as being a family member. I don't know. Actually, we're going to see a little bit of that when we get to on into chapter 3 and chapter 4. What I think Elimelech did understand as far as what his responsibilities were. But let's talk about this real quick. I think we need to kind of talk a little bit about this idea of someone who is a close relative being a redeemer. Because this is something that we don't have necessarily, or maybe not as strongly in our culture, but it was a very important piece of how Israelites took care of their family members. This idea of a family redeemer. So a family redeemer was someone that was a close relative who was given the responsibility of protecting their family's interest after a family member's death. There are two primary passages back in the law that you can go to and you can read about what these responsibilities were. One comes from Leviticus chapter 25, where it outlines that what happens to families' land. It doesn't mention like widows or anything here. It's just, but what happens to a family's land when the head of that family dies? And the law allowed for the next of kin of the deceased person to redeem that land. They get first dibs. They get to buy that land back for their family in order to redeem it or rescue it from maybe some other creditor out there who may have a lien on it he's able to protect that land, keep that land in the family. Leviticus chapter 25. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, this responsibility is expanded to marriage. If a man dies and that man does not have any children who will inherit his land, then his brother, or the closest of kin, if he doesn't have a brother, they could marry the widow and produce an heir for their brother in order to keep that family lineage alive. That's the background of when Naomi says, he's our family, he's a close relative, he's a redeemer. She's thinking it, she knows of this law, that there is a potential here that Boaz, if he so chooses, he could save our family. He could marry you and keep our family alive. That's where their hope is at this point in the story. Chapter 3. So, what are we going to do about this? And Naomi comes up with another plan. And it's a very bold plan. It involves Ruth taking off her garments of a widow where she would be mourning and getting prettied up. And I think at this point it might just be best. Let's just read chapter 3. I can't really improve on what's there. So let's read several verses and see what happens here with Ruth now that they recognize who Boaz is. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may go well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until after he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly to him and uncovered his feet and lay down. Time out. Think about the context here. Moabite women had a certain reputation for their moral character. At this point in the story, we should be feeling a little bit squirmish, shouldn't we? Wait a minute, we've got a Moabite woman, and she's going to this Israelite man, and he's asleep, and she's going to go uncover his feet and lay down with him. And by the way, one thing that's interesting, sometimes you should look up that phrase, uncover your feet, in a commentary. My understanding is there's a little bit of an innuendo, that was kind of a phrase that was used for, it could be used for uncovering more than just feet. And, but at this point, we're kind of thinking, whoa, wait a minute. What is this Moabite woman going to do? This isn't good. This is the days when the judges rules. Is Boaz going to do what's right in his own eyes like everybody else was doing? Well, see what happens. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." What is she doing there when she said, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer"? What is she asking him to do? Marry me. This is a marriage proposal. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than that of the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do all that you ask, for you are my fellow townsmen. For all of my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. This is the same phrase, a worthy woman, is the same phrase used in Proverbs chapter 31 about the worthy woman there. Someone of noble character. Was Ruth your stereotypical Moabite woman? A stereotypical Moabite widow, what would she do to provide for herself? Well, she would, quote unquote, go after the men, especially the rich ones. That's how you can provide for yourself. Ruth was different. And the way that the story is told really just kind of emphasizes, like, look, Ruth could have done something here. And instead, she proposed marriage. She said, be my redeemer. And Boaz recognized that she was a woman of noble character. She was not like those other women. And so he says, and now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there's a redeemer nearer than I. Wait a minute, Ruth. You have a closer relative than me. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So we see Ruth proposes marriage, and we see, and Ruth's character here is highlighted, that she is someone who's of noble character. She returns home. She tells Ruth the good news. He said he's going to redeem me. We just got to wait till tomorrow. And they both wait for the next day. That brings us to chapter 4. Boaz does exactly what he promised. He goes to the assembly of the elders. He presents his legal claim as a redeemer of Ruth, that he gives the next of kin the opportunity to redeem Ruth, which he declines, and then Boaz marries Ruth. And then the story ends on a high note. We have Boaz marrying Ruth, and they give birth to a little boy named Obed. And guess who gets to be Obed's nurse? Naomi. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and made his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on his lap and became his nurse. What began as a story of tragedy and death ends as just a great story. We've got Naomi rejoicing and the birth of a new baby. Real quickly, we're about out of time. I wish we had more time to talk about this because there's a lot more to chew on in the book of Ruth. But one thing, while I've got this outline up here, just to point out just kind of how the book is structured, which I think is just really cool. You've got the beginning of the book starts with tragedy and death, and it ends with joy and birth. You highlight, the book starts by highlighting Ruth as someone who is faithful and loyal to her family. And it ends with the story of Boaz, who is faithful and loyal to his family. And then you've got the middle chapters that both kind of mirror each other as well. Each chapter starts off with Ruth and Naomi trying their best to come up with a good plan. And providentially, it worked out. She just so happened to go to the right field at the right time and meet the right person, resulting in rejoicing. Interesting fact, God is hardly mentioned in the book of Ruth. Occasionally the characters will reference the Lord, but the author of the story, that narrator, whoever the prophet is who wrote this down, he never once said, and this is what God did, and God blessed it. He never even mentions God as he's telling the story. All he did is he tells you the story, which raises the question, what is God doing in the book of Ruth? What does the book of Ruth teach us about God's providence? I'm sorry, I'd love to have a really good discussion at this point, but there's one more really important thing that I need to get to. But I want y'all to chew on this. Think about it. What we see is that God uses the faithfulness and loyalty of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz to bring blessing. And you keep seeing all these small, just everyday tragedies, things that happen in people's lives, and yet somehow God weaves it all together to end up providing for his people. When faithful people make plans, that's how chapters 2 and 3 begin. Let's make a plan. God has the ability to work through those to accomplish great things. He can providentially weave together faithful people's actions to accomplish his purposes. Last thing, then the class is yours. How the book ends. After all of that story, there's this little epilogue at the very end. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, that's the child that was born, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Was it only Ruth and Naomi who God was protecting? This is God is already working behind the scenes. During the days of darkness and evil and famine, in the days of when the judges ruled, when the people were unfaithful and serving other gods, God is working through two individuals who were faithful and loyal to their family, who were faithful and loyal to God and to his commands. And just through those two individuals, not only did God bless Naomi, and not only did God bless Ruth, but he was working through them to provide blessing for who? Everybody. Through King David. So that's the book of Ruth. And we're out of time. So thank y'all.